how else does canon law differ from secular law?
Well, I would say that what I think is fundamental and the most interesting and important aspect is that the fundamental purpose of it is to seek the truth. And so there are no types of really discriminatory laws against different types of evidence, which is something that's very difficult in secular law. The like certain pivotal evidence that would change the way that a case goes. You know, like you've heard about like different videos or documents being thrown out because they weren't collected in the proper way.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't happen in the church. The point is to seek the truth. And I actually just had a case where there wasn't enough evidence in the case itself to be able to come to a proper decision. And it definitely seemed like some of the parties were withholding information. We want to seek the truth. And it definitely seems like there were some significant issues at the time of consent. But because the evidence itself couldn't meet the threshold that it was required, we didn't feel comfortable making like a negative judgment. Mm-hmm. So what we did was we are sending it back to collect further evidence so that we can seek the truth, so that even if it is a negative decision, that the marriage was valid, that we know that it's valid based on the evidence provided rather than a lack of evidence.
Ah, okay, I see. Oh, that is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What are the typical cases that you see? Is it all marriage annulment?
It's all marriage annulment. So I work for the marriage tribunal.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything that I do is just annulments. The Archdiocese and the tribunal will deal with other issues. There are sometimes defamation cases. There might be cases of sexual abuse. Those usually involve clergy. And if there is clergy involved as someone who's accused, then everybody who's judging the case also has to be clergy. So I wouldn't be working on those cases. I've looked at some defamation cases. I would say annulments are all that I do. That's also really all I'm interested in, because it's really interesting looking at the interpersonal relationships that people have and how their childhood experiences of their parents' marriage, as well as different things that they've experienced growing up, how that translates into their own marriage and their relationships with their children and so on.
I'd love to ask, like, I'm sure there are a lot of wounds that you can see that have been,
Yes, I get a full background usually of their childhood and family histories, as well as their relationship and marriage history. And it provides a lot of context for the circumstances of their life. And I was actually talking to a secular judge, and he was saying that that would be so helpful for his judging and also just for his peace of mind to understand where these people are coming from, because most of the time, people who hurt other people are very hurt themselves. Trying to understand the traumas, like, you know, abuse and neglect that happens in childhood, basically always, unless there's been some very intentional healing, manifests itself in adulthood in different incapacities just to function, whether it's in interpersonal relationships, in their job, or they have financial mismanagement, things like that. So it comes out. And so I find that that's very helpful in trying to understand people. And it's really given me so much more compassion for individuals that I meet, because having read so many, I guess, horrible stories of people's childhoods, it makes me realize that there are a lot of hurt people walking around. And if somebody is acting in a certain way, they're usually coming from a place of emotional neglect, lack of maturity that comes from just not being able to grow up in a normal and healthy environment. It's also really motivated me to be a better wife and mother, and to really try and love my children and pray for people who are in abusive situations, because it's so common. And I didn't realize that, because I grew up in a stable home, and I grew up, you know, all my friends, you know, parents were mostly together and they were loving. And I didn't realize that there were so many hurt people in the world. It's really changed my perspective on, you know, even things like homelessness, and trying to understand how people can be so stuck in certain circumstances.
A friend of mine who's studying psychology has often told me, hurt people hurt people.
Oh, yeah.
It's amazing how much grace both that we have received and that we still continue to need.
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yes. It's pretty incredible.
How do you balance the legal intricacies of canon law with the human and emotional aspects involved?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, having a better understanding of psychology, which was part of my studies and something that I personally am really fascinated with. One area of psychology that's really expanded in the last 10 years is personality disorders. And that can be an area which can really, really affect somebody's capacity to have proper interpersonal relationships, as well as the capacity to consent with a true understanding to marriage in the Catholic understanding. So that's been something that's really interesting, because I also hear a lot from other people that the church just hands out annulments very easily. I think that there are certain tribunals that they do. They don't reject anyone. However, I also know that there are tribunals that are the exact opposite, and any case that comes to them is always valid. So, but I would also say that having a better understanding of psychology, and I guess also people's broken, very often abusive and neglected backgrounds and their incapacity for emotional engagement, has helped me to realize that there are a lot of hurt people, and also that a lot of people might not be in valid marriages, and that that's something that we need to work on in the church in general, and helping people to heal, in supporting families to be able to provide healthy homes for the children that they're raising. And like, I think that it's a wider problem. I think that just because there are a lot of annulments, I think that's a symptom of a very, I guess, broken world. Like, we live in a sinful, broken world, and that's a symptom of it. There is an emotional aspect to it, but I do think that there are a lot of people that meet the legal threshold of incapacity for consent. And even though I am sometimes emotional about people's circumstances, I would still say that I don't think that it blurs my judgment, because there are certain thresholds. And I've read pretty extensively about the psychological incapacities, and even just like reading about different medications and how they affect people. It's been really interesting to, like ADHD. If someone has ADHD, it doesn't automatically make their marriage null. There are many people who can fully function with an ADHD diagnosis. Schizophrenia is one that's kind of interesting, because certain people can function properly, and then there are certain people that simply cannot find a medication where they can function in a way that they want to. And so that really can cloud their capacity for consent and understanding. And so there are so many different things. And I think that that's kind of my job, to be better educated, especially on many psychological issues. And we do have psychological experts for those more complex cases. But that's something that I see as my responsibility to learn about, because this, it is also someone's life that is in the hands. Like, a lot of people who are divorced and remarried civilly, and then have had a reversion in their faith, trying to find some type of place in the church can be really, really difficult, especially if their first marriage was valid. I think that would be one of the most difficult things as well, is that somebody who wants to return to their faith and the sacraments, but they've remarried, they have children, so they do have, very real responsibilities and obligations to their second family, but according to the church, they're still validly married to a different person. So it's just, there's like a sacramental limbo that many people find themselves in. And so finding a pastoral solution with their pastor, like, it's not something that I can change. So it can be heavy, but at the same time, if it's valid, it's valid. And if it's not, it's not.